IoT or Internet of Things technology is growing at an incredible rate, and manufacturers are always racing for the lead to release the latest and greatest device. In their pursuit for first to market, they often cut corners on security, which leads to vulnerabilities and potential attacks. Threat actors are constantly on the lookout for these type of vulnerabilities, and IoT devices, especially those that are new and unchecked, are very attractive to hackers and generally are easy to exploit. The point of the IoT is to send and receive data between several devices to make management easier for consumers. Smart devices collect data for many reasons, such as to improve efficiency, enhance experience, and help decision-making. Once again, the problem is that many IoT devices lack the security and privacy policies required to protect all this data. We often deal with sensitive information. For this reason, we need to store data securely across our entire network. This means redacting or anonymizing sensitive data before we store it. An alternative is to utilize data separation to decouple personally identifiable information, or PII, from data payloads. Data that's no longer useful should be disposed of in a safe and secure manner. No device is ever so perfect that it has no flaws, and once an opening is discovered, it doesn't take very long for hackers to take advantage of it. Almost every device requires updates to increase functionality, but since nothing is perfect, software developers might release a product that's not fully functional and depend on additional updates to fix flaws in the future. There are a few reasons why doing things this way is a risky business. First, the update might break the device's functionality. Second, most manufacturers are more concerned with releasing products faster than their competition than mitigating security risks. Third, manufacturers often stop releasing updates for devices once they start working on a different or better product. Fourth, many devices use unsupported legacy Linux kernels or other unsupported operating systems. Ideally, each device should undergo proper testing before being released to the market, and updates should happen regularly. Skipping these important steps is bad for the customers and manufacturers. After all, it only takes one large-scale data breach for a company to lose sensitive information, the public's trust, and their hard-earned credibility. Most IoT devices are made with embedded server technology. Although it's more practical and user-friendly, it makes the devices vulnerable to attacks such as ransomware. You should always implement secure authentication for both users and apps whenever possible. Authentication is an often overlooked tool in the security arsenal. IoT developers sometimes dismiss this notion due to timelines and serviceability. But this is just the sort of opening threat actors look for. Oftentimes, IoT devices provide direct inroads to the corporate infrastructure. For example, the Mirai botnet was one of the largest DDoS attacks when it first happened a few years ago. This attack was so successful because it found vulnerable IoT devices and used default credentials to log in and infect them. Although all devices should authenticate before they access the network, many IoT devices allow weak or default passwords, which are easy to crack. The primary issue here is that there's no defined regulation for IoT authentication, only guidelines. So companies aren't forced to follow these guidelines and aren't punished if they don't. Some ways right off the bat to strengthen IoT devices with authentication are to use two-factor authentication, or 2FA, and enforce strong passwords and certificates. Even if devices are protected with authentication, there's another vulnerability that pops up as a device sends and receives data. That vulnerability is lack of encryption. Data encryption and decryption is an ongoing process. Most IoT network sensors aren't capable of supporting this process, which means that most data is transferred as text. And in many cases, ports listening to the internet are left open continuously. Both of these factors make the data extremely vulnerable to malicious acts. Now that we've looked at some of the major challenges with IoT security, let's go through some of the most prominent IoT attacks. One of the most common attacks on the IoT is a distributed denial of service, or DDoS attack. First, a machine must be infected with a remote trigger and becomes a zombie. The user has no idea the machine is infected since there is little trace of the zombie process. When triggered, the zombie is activated and begins attacking. The machine, along with thousands or millions more, together called a botnet, attack their target, such as a website or internet-based service, and render it useless from the overload of all the attacks at once. Next, there's HVAC exploitation. HVAC stands for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. This includes different systems that provide comfort through environmental regulation in most indoor settings. Hackers exploit HVAC system weaknesses to gain access to corporate network infrastructure. Another important attack is ransomware. In this attack, the hacker gains access to a workstation. It runs a process that encrypts files and locks them using a key. The user is notified of the attack and must pay a ransom to get the key. Injections are a type of malware attack where a hacker injects malicious code to trick an application into performing actions that it wouldn't otherwise. Some of the most common ones are SQL and LDAP injection. SQL, or Structured Query Language, injection involves a hacker inserting a malicious SQL statement that exposes content being sent to an application. LDAP stands for Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. It works in a similar way, but it targets a directory system. For example, the hacker could insert malicious code into a form that accepts usernames. If the form input is unsecure, it'll execute the malicious code and expose the usernames. The best protection against injection attacks is to validate and sanitize data. Validating means adding code to ensure the user's data entry meets expectations. Sanitizing means getting rid of suspicious parts of the data. Also, setting controls that limit the amount of information that can be exposed by injection is very helpful as well. Most web application developers use libraries and frameworks while building their applications because it adds functionality. But many hackers look for weaknesses in those libraries and frameworks to perform massive attacks. For example, if a hacker can find a weakness in even just one very popular component, they'll suddenly be able to attack hundreds or even thousands of apps. Most developers that use libraries and frameworks patch their components regularly to provide better security. The problem is that web application developers sometimes don't have the most recently updated version of the component running on their app. The best way to prevent this problem is for application developers to remove all unused components. They should also verify that they're using components from a trusted source and using the most recently updated version. OWASP, or Open Web Application Security Project, is a nonprofit organization comprised of software developers, engineers, and freelancers. They provide tools and resources for web app security. From time to time, OWASP publishes a report on the 10 most serious web app security risks affecting the cyber world. It's a good idea to check this list out occasionally to stay up to date on these issues. That's it for this lesson. In this lesson, we looked at IoT security. As the IoT grows and develops, more devices become susceptible to exploitation, and hackers are always on the lookout for an easy opportunity. Understanding the most widespread challenges affecting the IoT can help protect your data and strengthen your overall security posture.